Before you continue watching this story, I want you to do something strange. Try not to blink. Just for 10 seconds. Because tonight's story is about a doll that only moves when you blink. A college student bought an old doll from a second-hand shop. At first, it looked completely normal. But one night, he realized something horrifying. Every time he blinked, the doll was closer. Just a little closer. He tried to stay awake. He tried not to blink. But the human body cannot fight blinking forever. And when he finally closed his eyes for 1 second, the doll was no longer across the room. It was standing right in front of him. And it was smiling. Daniel never believed in cursed objects. He was a film student living in a small apartment near Chicago, always searching for strange things he could use in his horror videos. One rainy afternoon, he wandered into a narrow antique shop hidden between two old buildings. The shop smelled like dust and wet wood. Rows of forgotten objects filled the room. Broken clocks. Rusty mirrors. Old dolls. One doll immediately caught his attention. It was sitting alone on a wooden chair near the back wall. The doll had messy brown hair, pale cracked skin, and glass eyes that seemed strangely lifelike. A faded tag hung from its wrist. $10. Daniel laughed. Perfect for a horror prop. The old shop owner suddenly appeared beside him. You shouldn't take that one. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why not? The old man hesitated. That doll doesn't like being watched. Daniel chuckled. That's exactly why I want it. The man looked uncomfortable, but eventually took the money. As Daniel left the shop, he felt something strange. The doll seemed heavier than it should have been. And for a brief moment, he could swear the doll's eyes were staring directly at him. But when he looked again, they were staring straight ahead. Before we continue, let's hit the like and subscribe buttons. Continue to support this channel so it can grow. Thank you. Let's continue with the story. That night, Daniel placed the doll on a chair in his bedroom. He planned to film a creepy YouTube video the next day. The doll sat across the room, facing his bed. At around 2:30 a.m., Daniel woke up. Something felt wrong. The room was silent. Too silent. His eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. Then he saw the doll, still sitting in the chair. But something felt different. Daniel frowned. Wasn't the chair closer to the door earlier? He rubbed his eyes. Then he blinked. Just once. When he opened his eyes again, the doll was no longer on the chair. It was now sitting on the small table beside the wall. Daniel froze. His heart started beating faster. Did I move it earlier? He whispered to himself. He tried to calm down. Maybe he had simply forgotten. He stared at the doll for several seconds. Nothing happened. Then his eyes blinked again. Automatically. And when they opened, the doll was now on the floor, halfway between the table and his bed. Daniel sat up instantly. Cold fear crawled up his spine. No way. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The doll stared back at him with the same empty glass eyes. But now, its head seemed slightly tilted, as if it had been watching him. Daniel forced himself not to blink. His eyes started to burn. Seconds passed. Then his body betrayed him. He blinked. And when his eyes opened again, the doll had moved even closer to the bed, only a few feet away. Daniel's breathing became shaky. And that's when he realized something terrifying. The doll only moved when he blinked. Daniel barely slept. The idea that the doll moved when he blinked sounded impossible, insane even. Yet every time he closed his eyes for even a fraction of a second, the doll seemed to be closer. At 3:12 a.m., Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the doll across the room. It was standing now, That alone made his stomach twist with fear. When he had placed it in the room earlier that night, the doll had been sitting on a wooden chair near the wall. But now it was standing upright on the floor beside the chair. Daniel's mind tried to find logic. Maybe I moved it earlier. Maybe I'm just tired. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The doll's glass eyes stared straight ahead. Its cracked porcelain face looked emotionless. Yet something about it felt alive. Daniel grabbed his camera from his desk. "If this thing moves," he muttered nervously, "I'm going to prove it." He placed the camera on a stack of books so it faced the doll directly. The red recording light blinked on. Recording? Daniel sat back on the bed, careful to keep the doll in his line of sight. His heart pounded in his chest. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing happened. The doll didn't move. Daniel forced himself not to blink. His eyes began to burn almost immediately. The longer he stared, the worse it became. His eyelids twitched. Tears formed at the corners of his eyes. But he refused to close them. "Come on," he whispered under his breath. "Move." The room remained completely silent. Outside, the wind rattled faintly against the apartment windows. A distant car drove past on the empty street. Still nothing. Daniel's eyes felt like sandpaper. He tried to widen them, stretching them open as far as he could. But the human body can only resist blinking for so long. Finally, his eyes closed. Just for a second. When Daniel opened them again, his entire body froze. The doll had moved. It was no longer beside the chair. Now it was standing halfway between the chair and his bed. Daniel's throat went dry. "No, no, no, no." He looked at the doll in disbelief. Its head seemed slightly tilted now, as if it were studying him. Daniel immediately grabbed the camera. His hands trembled as he stopped the recording. "Okay," he said to himself nervously. "Let's see what really happened." He rewound the footage. The video began playing on the camera screen. Daniel watched carefully. On the screen, the doll stood beside the chair, exactly where it had been before. Daniel stared intensely, waiting, watching. In the video, Daniel sat on the bed staring across the room. Seconds passed. Then Daniel blinked. But the doll in the video never moved. Not even slightly. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. His breathing became uneven. "No, that's not right." He replayed the footage again. Same result. The doll stayed completely still. But in the real room, it was now much closer. Daniel slowly looked up from the camera. His blood ran cold. The doll was now standing only a few feet away from the bed, much closer than it had been before. Daniel's chest tightened with panic. The camera hadn't recorded the movement, meaning whatever the doll was doing, it only existed in the moment his eyes were closed. Not in reality. Not on camera. Only when he blinked. Daniel swallowed hard. The doll's glass eyes now seemed to reflect the dim light of the room. They looked almost wet. Almost alive. His body trembled as he forced himself to stare at it again. "Okay," he whispered. "I understand the rule now. If I don't blink, you can't move." For a moment, Daniel felt a small sense of control. As long as he kept his eyes open, the doll couldn't get closer. But then another terrifying thought crossed his mind. His eyes were already burning. They were watering uncontrollably now. Sooner or later, he would blink again. Daniel tried to move slowly toward the door while keeping his eyes locked on the doll. Step by step, his heart pounded violently. If he could just get out of the room. Maybe he could leave the apartment. Maybe he could throw the doll away. But his eyes twitched again. They were about to close. "No, no, no!" Daniel desperately rubbed them without fully closing them, but it was useless. His eyelids dropped for less than half a second, and when they opened again, Daniel felt his entire body go numb. The doll was no longer across the room. It was standing right beside his bed, only 2 feet away. Its head had turned slightly toward him, and for the first time, Daniel noticed something he hadn't seen before. The doll's lips were slowly curling upward, forming a small, unnatural smile. Daniel's breathing stopped, because if the doll could move that far in one blink, then the next blink might be enough. And his eyes were already starting to close again. Cliffhanger. Daniel tried to force his eyes open, but as his vision blurred from exhaustion, he realized something even more terrifying. The doll's eyes had just blinked first. Daniel's breath stopped. For a moment, he wasn't even sure what he had seen. The doll's eyes had just blinked. Slowly, quietly, like a real human being. Daniel stumbled backward, nearly falling over the edge of the bed. "No, that's not possible." His heart pounded violently against his ribs. The doll stood only 2 feet away now. Its cracked porcelain face looked exactly the same. The same lifeless smile. The same glass eyes. Except those eyes were no longer completely still. They looked wet. Alive. Watching him, Daniel forced himself not to blink again. His eyes burned like fire, but fear kept them open. "Stay back," he whispered. The doll didn't move. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Daniel tried to breathe slowly. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe his brain was just exhausted. Then he saw it again. The doll's eyelids moved, just slightly. Then they closed, and opened again. Blink. Daniel's entire body froze. The doll had blinked, and when its eyes opened, it was closer. Not by much. Just a few inches. But Daniel noticed. Oh God! He suddenly understood something horrifying. Before, the doll moved when he blinked. Now, it moved when it blinked. The rules had changed. Daniel backed toward the bedroom door slowly. The doll remained perfectly still again, watching him, waiting. Seconds passed. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. He kept his eyes locked on the doll, but his mind raced with panic. If the doll could blink whenever it wanted, then it could move whenever it wanted. Another blink. The doll's eyelids slowly closed. Daniel shouted in terror. No! But it was too late. When the doll opened its eyes again, it was standing at the edge of the bed, only inches away now. Daniel bolted toward the door. He threw it open and rushed into the hallway. The lights flickered above him. His heart pounded as he ran toward the living room. Behind him, he heard something soft. Tap, tap, tap. Small footsteps. Daniel didn't dare look back. He ran into the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife he could find. This isn't real, he muttered. This isn't real. His hand shook violently. Then the hallway lights suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the apartment. Daniel turned slowly toward the hallway. Silence filled the room. Then he heard it. Blink. A soft clicking sound, like porcelain scraping. Daniel raised the knife defensively. Stay back! The kitchen light flickered weakly. For a moment nothing was there. Then the doll appeared at the end of the hallway, standing perfectly still. Its head tilted slightly to the side. Its smile wider than before. Daniel backed against the kitchen counter. You're just a toy, he whispered desperately. The doll blinked again. When its eyes opened, it was halfway down the hallway. Daniel screamed and threw the knife. The blade hit the wall beside the doll and fell to the floor. The doll didn't react. It just stared at him. Then its eyelids closed again. Blink. When they opened, the doll was standing in the kitchen doorway, right in front of him. Daniel pressed himself against the counter. There was nowhere left to run. The doll raised its small porcelain hand. Its fingers moved stiffly, like something learning how to use a body. Then its mouth slowly opened. A dry cracking sound echoed from inside the porcelain face. Daniel's blood ran cold, because the doll wasn't just moving anymore. It was trying to speak. Its lips trembled. Then a voice came out. Not a child's voice. Not a doll's voice. But something deeper. Something ancient. Blink! Daniel shook his head violently. No! The doll took one slow step forward, its glass eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Blink! It whispered again. Daniel squeezed his eyes open wider. Tears streamed down his face from the pain. I won't! The doll blinked once more. When its eyes opened again, it was standing directly in front of Daniel. Close enough that he could see tiny cracks spreading across its porcelain skin. The doll slowly lifted its head, and Daniel realized something far worse than before. The doll wasn't looking at his face. It was staring directly at his eyes. Waiting for the moment he couldn't keep them open anymore. And Daniel knew the truth. Sooner or later, everyone blinks. Daniel's vision began to blur from exhaustion. His eyelids trembled uncontrollably. And just before they finally closed, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Behind the doll, another pair of glass eyes opened in the darkness. Daniel's eyes burned. It felt like sand had been poured beneath his eyelids. He hadn't blinked in what felt like forever. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he stared at the porcelain doll standing in front of him. The doll didn't move. It simply watched, waiting. Daniel's breathing became shallow. His chest tightened with panic. I can't keep this up, he whispered. The doll's glass eyes reflected the dim kitchen light. They looked almost alive now. And behind it, Daniel still saw them. More shapes in the darkness. More dolls. At first there had only been one. Then two. Now he could see at least 5 small silhouettes standing behind the first doll. All of them perfectly still. All of them watching him. Daniel felt the room spinning. His vision blurred. No, he whispered weakly. I won't blink. The first doll tilted its head slowly. Its cracked porcelain smile widened just a little more. Then it spoke again. The voice sounded like dry bones scraping together. Everyone blinks. Daniel's knees trembled. His body was giving up. He hadn't slept. He hadn't rested. And his eyes were shutting down. For a second his vision flickered. A tiny blink almost happened. Daniel screamed and forced his eyes wider. But the pain exploded behind them. He felt something warm trickle down his face. Blood. The doll stepped closer. Daniel could hear its tiny porcelain feet on the floor. Tap. 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 But he hadn't blinked. Which meant the doll was moving even when he watched. Daniel's heart dropped. You changed the rules. The doll's smile widened. Did I? Another step. Now it stood only inches away from him. Daniel could see deep cracks spreading across the doll's porcelain skin. Inside those cracks, something dark moved. Something alive. The doll lifted its tiny hand slowly. Its fingers twitched like a spider testing its legs. Daniel's eyes trembled violently now. His vision faded in and out. The world blurred. Please, he whispered. Just stop. The doll leaned closer. So close that Daniel could see his own reflection in its glass eyes. But something was wrong with the reflection. Daniel saw himself, standing still, eyes closed, completely motionless. No! His voice shook. That's not me, the doll whispered softly. That's you. In a moment. Daniel's eyelids finally gave up. They slammed shut for a fraction of a second. Just one blink. And when Daniel's eyes opened again, the doll was gone. Daniel gasped and looked around wildly. The kitchen was empty. The hallway was dark. The apartment was silent. For several seconds, Daniel just stood there, breathing heavily. Then he laughed weakly. I did it! It's gone! He wiped tears from his face. His eyes still burned. But the nightmare was over. Or so he thought. Daniel turned toward the living room and froze. There was something sitting on the couch. A doll, but not the same one. This one looked different. Older. Its porcelain face was cracked and broken. But the eyes were human. Daniel stepped closer slowly. The doll wore a tiny shirt. A shirt Daniel recognized. It was his. His breath stopped. He leaned closer to the doll's face. And then he saw it. Inside the doll's glass eyes. A reflection. The reflection showed Daniel standing in front of it. But something about the reflection was wrong. Because in the reflection, Daniel wasn't standing. He was sitting, perfectly still, on the couch. Daniel slowly turned toward the couch beside him, and his blood froze. There sat another doll, a porcelain doll, wearing Daniel's clothes, with Daniel's face. Its glass eyes stared forward, unmoving, empty. Daniel felt something cold crawl up his spine. Then he heard the whisper again, right behind him. Blink! Daniel spun around. The original doll stood there again, smiling wider than ever. And behind it, dozens of other dolls slowly stepped out of the darkness. Their glass eyes all locked onto him, watching, waiting. Because the worst part wasn't the dolls. The worst part was what Daniel suddenly realized. He hadn't blinked, not even once, for several seconds. And the dolls weren't moving anymore. They didn't need to, because Daniel finally understood the truth. The dolls didn't move when you blinked. They moved when you stopped being human. And when Daniel tried to scream, no sound came out. His body felt stiff, cold, frozen. Across the room, the porcelain doll on the couch slowly turned its head. Its glass eyes looked directly at the camera Daniel had left recording. And then it blinked. The camera continued recording. But now the apartment looked different. Silent, still, filled with dolls. And on the couch sat the newest one. A porcelain doll that looked exactly like Daniel. Its glass eyes stared directly into the camera, waiting for the next person to blink.